If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. What's the scariest real story you have? My sister and I were very young, and our great uncle, a priest, loved to tell us ghost stories before bedtime. This isn't your average campfire story either. This is the kind where it's read from a book and takes a while. Well, my family stayed with my great uncle every Thanksgiving, and my sister and I had to share a room with 2 twin beds. We moved to the same bed, and my great uncle sat on the other reading us a new ghost story. Well, this particular time he read a tale of a man who lost his hand and was given the amputated hand of a murderer to replace it. My great uncle was a storyteller, probably the best I've ever known, and many times during the story he would do voices and mimic parts with his hands in an attempt to try and scare us more. In the end, he would close the book and tell us to go to bed. This time, he asked that we pray against the bed we were both in, and as my sister and I knelt to pray, my mother reached out from under the bed and grabbed both of us. I had no idea she had been there the entire time. To this day, it is one of the most terrifying moments of my life. The guy that was with us, I was 13, tried to calm us down and said that it probably was an animal running away from another one. It happens in a forest so big. So we went back to our tent, all cool. Camp was freaking awesome, went back to Italy all happy, and almost forgot about that night. Well, after a few weeks I am home, reading some stuff online, and just for curiosity I go and see if during the summer of 2006 something happened in the spot where we were camping. Found out that in the same period, August 2006, a few kilometers away from where we were, a woman was found dead. My dad was in the log woods at 5:30 a.m. He saw a guy on the side of his logging trail leaned up against a tree with a bottle of rye whiskey in between his legs. An old black man in overalls is how I remember him telling the story. The guy just looked asleep. But my dad checked on him as this was pretty deep into the woods. He started by saying, "Hey mister," which had no effect. He then leaned down and began shaking his shoulder. This didn't work either. He then went to slap his face, and as soon as his hand touched the man's face, my dad said all the blood ran out of his face and he thought he might pass out. The man's face was as cold as ice, and it had a waxy quality to it. He was very much dead. And my father was all alone with him miles deep into fog-covered woods. Fun epilogue, my dad had the worst time getting the cops out there. It was the 70s, so he couldn't just make a cell call. He was deep in the woods in a black populated area in the south. He was alone and was white. He knocked on house after house, but no one wanted to hear from a random white guy with a truck full of chainsaws at 6 a.m. I'd like to think a lot of them looked out the window and just said, "Not fucking today." Nope. Finally, a very skeptical family opened the door and he was just asking to use the phone to call the police. The mom handed the phone to him from the door and asked him what number he wanted to dial. He said 911, I guess. Cops interviewed him for a while and determined the guy just wandered off drunk in the woods and died of exposure. No foul play, as there were no marks on him and he was just leaned up against a tree with a bottle of rye. I suppose it's not blood chilling, but it's the scariest thing I know of that didn't turn out to be nothing. It really was a dead guy. I remember when I was a very little girl I was close to my aunt. She was an aunt by marriage, so my uncle's wife. They lived downstairs from us in a 2-family house. My aunt would always visit me. One day, I'm sitting in the living room watching TV and my mom, grandmother, and uncle are all talking at the kitchen table. He's crying, but when I asked why, they told me to leave the room. All they would explain was that his pet bird was sick or something. My aunt came upstairs, like usual, but instead of sitting with me and her daughter, she was standing in the hallway waving at me, and wouldn't come out. I thought she was just playing and I waved back, then got into my show. My aunt did this every now and then but wouldn't step out of the hallway into the living room. Eventually she stopped and I asked my mom what happened to her all the time. She said she moved and broke up with my uncle. Years later, it's around the holidays and I ask about her, wondering why she never sees my cousin. I'm like 12 at the time. My mom and grandma look at each other and grandma leaves the room. My mom explains that Aunt Dee killed herself. She did it when I was 5. She drove out to the beach, knowing it would be abandoned in the winter, got drunk, and owed it on pills. The cops found her car the next day. I don't know why she did it. I told my mom I would see her in the hallway and that she would wave and smile. My parents didn't believe me. So I was at my grandmother's house after she had passed and a bunch of my family was there. There was a house across from it that my cousins lived in, so they were also with us. I was younger at the time and we were all in the house across from my grandmother's one without any parents or people watching us. So one of the older cousins said they were bored and asked us if we had ever heard of Slenderman. I had heard of it, but I said no because I wanted him to not say anything because I knew it would scare my little brother. So we looked it up, and eventually we're feeling really kind of nervous and scared after something like watching a horror movie. So we basically just started pointing at random things and yelling, "It Slenderman." And it would be a race to see who could get away. We would run away fake screaming and laughing. So we eventually lead ourselves outside and we ran scream laughing to my grandmother's house. So we went inside out of breath with our family members sorting all kinds of stuff. So sitting by the window I'm just looking outside, and something just zooms past the window, like the speed of something unnatural. It was the colors of that stupid Slenderman dude. A little white at the top, red where a tie should be, and a black suit. I thought maybe for a second I had just scared myself so much I hallucinated, but I look across the table and see my younger cousin looking back at me with a terrified look on his face. He said that he saw it as well. All of my cousins were inside the house and it wasn't some sort of prank on us by one of their friends. It was a car, nothing could have gone that fast. Doesn't sound too scary, but I still question what that was to this day. I was staying in a cheap motel, in the room at the far end of the building. I was awake sometime before dawn, maybe 2 or 3 a.m. Sister was asleep, so I was sitting in the dark on my phone. It started quiet, distant. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a cat meowing, but it started to get louder. It was a woman crying. Not just crying, but wailing. Classic, Japanese crying ghost wailing. A long whine followed by a few exaggerated sobs. It was getting louder, no, closer. The wailing was clearly, steadily getting closer and closer to my room. I froze. I couldn't convince myself to look out the peephole. I considered calling the cops, I even dialed, but didn't call 911. The wailing creature came right up to my door. Then turned away. The sound was now pointed down the hall instead of at my door. And it started to leave. I was still frozen, unable to go look. Then finally, as the crying had moved down the hall about halfway, through the sobs, a voice spoke up, "I don't want to go back to jail." I finally looked. This goddamn woman was wailing into her cell. Even after being so terrified that I could barely breathe, I feel bad for whoever was on the other end of that call. I was backing around Europe and was in Prague. I went out one night by myself and it was about time I thought to catch the last trolley back to the hostel I was staying at. It was pretty far out, last stop on the trolley, cheap, but actually a great spot to stay. I totally messed up. I was all mixed up, I had no idea where I was and I made it to the end of the line, which was not where I was supposed to be at all. I got off and I was just in this like super industrial park where people must take public transport to work every day. There were no houses but plenty of sketchy characters coming out of the dark every once in a while. I was waiting for a trolley to take me back in the other direction. I had taken my SD card out of my camera in case someone jumped me. The trolley wasn't coming, and after a while I was like, I can't just sit here all night. I thought if I just walk back along the tracks this way I will be going back towards the city. I came to a river and to follow the tracks I had to cross the bridge. I don't understand a word of Czech, but I knew the sign said you would be an idiot to cross this bridge on foot. Still, I couldn't see any other way where I wasn't going to get more lost, and I was pretty sure the trolleys were done for the night. About halfway across I feel and hear the rumble and can see the lights coming up behind me. I wasn't going to outrun this thing. As quick as I could think I just grabbed the railing, jumped over and clung to the outside of this bridge above a major river as the trolley went by. I don't even think the driver saw any of it. When it passed I pulled myself back over the railing and got off that bridge as fast as I could. I walked along in some lower income suburbs. I saw a bunch of kids lighting shit on fire in a parking lot. They definitely took notice of me and I was definitely keeping an eye on them. I saw a cab and I couldn't explain to him where I was trying to go. I finally saw a guy with a saxophone on his back and thought, guys carrying saxes have to be nice and knowledgeable. I sped up my pace, but he sped up too. I finally shouted to him that I needed help figuring out where I was. He thought I was trying to run up on him for his sax, but he was nice and was the person who could finally explain to me where I needed to go, which was only about 2 blocks away at this point. I've had lots of paranormal experiences. It runs in my family and I plan to, someday, compose a book of our experiences through the years. The experience that sticks with me the strongest occurred when I was 12 years old. My mother was a single parent who worked hard, long hours to provide for my older sister and myself, so we were frequently home alone. It worked out well that we lived next door to my grandmother and some aunts and uncles, so there was always someone watching over us. One night, I was awakened by my 2 kittens crying at my bedroom door around 10:30 p.m. My mother's shift ended at 11 p.m., so I knew she wouldn't be home yet. I figured that the kittens had to use the litter box, so I let them out. Instead of heading downstairs to take care of the necessities, they immediately went to my mother's bedroom door, next to mine, which was slightly away, and told me to go back to sleep. I wandered out of her room, terrified and unsure of what to do next. As I stood again out in the hall, still listening to the movement on my mother's bed, our cat Leo, who had been sitting on the landing this entire time, suddenly rushed down the stairs and disappeared into the darkness of the first floor. I called to him, trying to be as quiet as possible. Leo. Here, kitty, kitty. As I took a breath to call again, I was interrupted by a vigorous scratching at mother's door as if something large was trying to get out. I panicked and ran back into my sister's room, grabbed the phone from her wall and called my aunt. I was nearly in tears telling her that somebody was locked in Mama's bedroom trying to get out. I was convinced there was a man crouched on the floor, trying to pretend to be one of our pets so that I would let him out. My uncle and cousins rushed over brandishing baseball bats and other weapons. I was forced to gather my courage and run down to the pitch-black first floor to let them in the house. They ascended the stairs and burst into my mother's room only to find it empty with the sliding window secured from the inside. Our mother arrived home as our relatives were leaving and checking the outside of the house. I told her what happened and my sister insisted that one of the cats had been locked in the room and I had overreacted. I maintained that something big with broad nails was scratching at that door for all they were worth. Whatever it was left no marks on the door, and I realized once things had calmed down, that, for all the noise it made, it didn't move the door at all. We lived in a less than sturdy building. Those doors moved easily in their frames and it should have been rattling with as much volume as the scratching upon it, but it never moved. We lived there another 15 years and, after that experience, I would never go into that room at night alone. Even in the daytime, I made a point to take a dog with me if I went in there. I've got a lot of messed up and scary things that have happened to me, but I'll tell one I haven't told a billion times. My friend and I were walking my dog to the park in our neighborhood. There was a young guy we'd never seen before across the street from the park. He was acting very strange, hitting things, yelling at nothing, and his posture was aggressive. He crossed the street and began walking toward us. My dog did not like him at all, bad sign, she liked everyone. We walked away and he followed, jerking and jolting around like he couldn't control himself. We walked faster to get distance. We went the back way. I saw two older guys go that way and wanted to have potential backup. Before we turned the corner we looked back and this dude was full sprinting after us. We ran and caught up to the man and let them know what was happening. When we looked back, the guy was by a flagpole at the end of the street, marching in place, and laughed screaming with a really disturbing look on his face. The men told us to get home, to not worry, and walked back toward the guy. I have no idea what went down after we left, never saw that dude again. Driving back from Disney World with my kids ages 8 and 6, my two parents in their 60s and my husband. We had gotten stuck in rush hour traffic and everyone except me had to pee. Badly. My husband took the first exit he could with a gas station and a bathroom in Atlanta. I ended up staying in the car while my mom took my two daughters to the bathroom with her. My husband and dad both bail for a smoke break and bathroom break. I happened to look up and my husband's angry stomping back to the car. Apparently there is a gentleman taking his sweet time in the only men's room. He ends up peeing behind the gas station in desperation and sits back in the car with me waiting for everyone else. That's when we notice a younger guy tripping on some sort of drug hard. He is bum rushing people leaving the gas station hard. His body is jerking side to side, hard. He is super emaciated, he almost looks like something out of The Walking Dead, and all I can think is I'm stuck in the car and this guy is between me and my kids and parents, everything I hold dear to me in the world. He is so out of it, all I can think about is how unpredictable he is. The guy starts walking over to our car and starts to come to the door. Sidebar: my husband is a big supporter of carrying his gun on him despite me rolling my eyes at him. He locked our doors and casually laid the gun out on the dashboard in eyesight. As he got closer the guy did a 180 and started walking away. My dad led my mom and my kids safely back to the car, keeping himself between them and the guy while my husband and I watched on. We left quickly and vowed to never take a bathroom stop anywhere in Atlanta we weren't familiar with. It probably isn't that scary in hindsight, but that feeling of powerlessness sticks with me even today. I hope that poor guy found some help. I hear a sound at my dead granddad's house that literally no one else seems to hear. Anytime I've slept there it has woken me up at least twice a night. I usually explained it away as the central air conditioning making a weird noise. One night I stayed up late in the living room and it was even louder, coming from the dining room. I jumped out of my seat, it was so loud. It constantly wakes me up, it is so loud. The best way I can describe it is as a very large paperback book falling off a table onto the floor and very briefly bouncing. The first few times I heard it I was half asleep and blamed it on my cat, who who is not even at this house, knocking something over. I've stayed there before and never heard this sound before he died. I know where he died and it's not exactly where this sound comes from, so at least there's that. It comes from the dining room. It is loud as hell. We rented the house out for 2 months and the renters never complained of it. My family who have stayed there never complained of it. It's very loud and I seem to be the only person who ever hears it. I still hope it's just the sump pump and I'm there at the right time, but I really don't know. How has no one else heard it? I've only stayed there for a couple days on and off and it's woken me up every single time. I grew up in a very small, very rural town in the southwest corner of California's Central Valley. I know when many people think of anywhere in California, they think freeways, beaches and people. In my case, there were areas I could drive to and be 30 miles from the nearest person. When I was 17 years old, my best friend and I decided we'd take his pickup truck southwest out of town, over the Temblor mountain range, and into the vast Carrizo Plains, a prehistoric dry lake that ran 35 miles east/west and 10 miles north/south. We stopped for a moment at the crest, about 4,000, and surveyed the giant valley below us. It was a clear late night, around midnight, and far down below, we both saw a small orange flicker. Maybe 2 to 3 miles as the crown flies from our vantage point. It took 15 minutes to get there in 4WD, down the backside of the mountain. When we arrived, we found that it was the burning embers of a fire. No fire pit, no tire tracks, no people. I took out a large spotlight, plugged it into the cigarette lighter plug, opened the passenger window and illuminated the immediate area in a 360 degrees pattern. Nothing. Nobody. Not a bush, not a tree, nothing but flat, even dry lake bed. I brought the light back into the cab, and we positioned the truck to spin the rear tires to choke out the fire. My buddy was a literal Boy Scout. When my head came back to a level position, I saw him. Let me take a step back here for a second and explain something about southwest Kern County in the mid-90s. It was white. In my community of 25,000, we had one black family that lived in town. One. Less than 50 years before that time, it was common knowledge not to let the sun set on your black ass in Taft. There was actually a sign on the road into town. A long history of racism, violence, and overall bigotry to this day hangs over the area. Back to the lake bed. I saw him. The largest human man I had ever seen. Black, between 6'4" and 6'7", muscular, naked except for a pair of undersized denim shorts that I remember looking ripped. He was staring directly at me, not an arm's length from me outside the passenger window. He was almost smiling at me, but it was a wide eyes, dangerous smile. I looked at me friend and started to yell go go go, and from the look on his face, I was certain he saw the same thing I did. The truck took off in a giant cloud of dust. I shouted, "Did you see that?" And his response was something like, "WTF, you scared the shit out of me, what is wrong?" I sunk. I knew what I saw, I wasn't crazy, and I wasn't high or drunk. I explained exactly what I saw, in great detail. I was pretty sure he believed me. Here's the kicker, there were at least 20 different ways to get into town from where we were. Several dirt roads, mountain roads, long ways around from either side, etc. My buddy drove fast back to town, and we came in a different way than we left. In all, it took nearly 40 minutes to see the lights of town. Still driving fast, we came around a turn on the paved road down the foothills into the south side of town, and it happened. The same man stepped out from behind a row of tumbleweeds along the side of the road onto the shoulder. Still nearly unclothed, staring at us both. As we passed, both of our necks jerking backward to continue looking at the man as he very purposefully wagged his index finger at us in that Dennis Nedry style. "Please tell me you saw that." I remember saying to my buddy. I could tell by his eyes that he did, and he nodded, asking if that was the same guy. "No dude, that's a totally different giant half-naked black guy." She looked really mad, and was texting quickly as if she was in a really heated argument. She had short bleached white hair and really sick tattoos. That's what made her stick out to me, her tattoos. They were awesome. So anyway, my boyfriend and friend came back over and we walked behind that family for a while. We ended up getting distracted by the boardwalk performers and I lost sight of them. I didn't think anything of it though. Around 2 a.m., we were some of the only people on the boardwalk besides the small groups of drunk teenagers smoking cigarettes and yelling. And I saw her again, running towards the beach crying. I wanted to go after her and ask if she was okay, but my boyfriend advised me to just stay out of it and keep going. We went to our hotel and fell asleep. At about 6 a.m., I got up and rolled a joint and quietly left the room. The hotel we were staying at had a nice sitting area out front looking over the ocean. I admired the view for a few minutes when I noticed her again. She was walking down the boardwalk looking confused and scared. She was crying, still. I got this weird gut feeling to follow her. I tucked my joint into my clutch and followed a little bit behind her. She looked nervous and was looking left and right as if she was lost. I followed her all the way to the 2nd Street beach ramp. She suddenly bursted into a full sprint crying hysterically. I don't know why, but I shouted, "Hey, wait. Do you need help?" I ran to the beach and just stood in shock. Nobody was there. But I could hear soft sobbing nearby to the right of me. I walked down the beach a little ways before I saw it. Where the sobbing sounds had led me, there was an arm sticking out from the sand. It was her arm. It was her tattoos. I'll never forget them. The sobbing stopped and suddenly the ambient noises of the beach became louder again. I didn't notice at the time, but the whole time I was following her and then following the crying, everything else was completely silent. When I realized what I was looking at, I screamed for someone to call 911. A middle-aged couple came jogging up, the wife screamed and the husband dialed them right away. I didn't have my phone with me. I don't like when sand ends up in the charging port. The police arrived a little while later. When they took my statement, I didn't even know what to tell them. I said I had been walking down the beach and just found her. It took them hours to dig her out. When they finally started to pull her out, they asked that all civilians and witnesses be led away. As we were walking with the police to a nearby spot to answer more questions, I saw her standing behind them, looking down at her own body. She looked up at me, nodded, and then she was gone. Initially the reports all said she sat in a hole and it collapsed around her, but then it was later discovered that the big sand cleaners may have pushed the sand into the hole by mistake. But here's where it gets scary. She had been missing since 2 a.m. She died somewhere between 2 to 3 a.m. And yet I saw and followed her. The entire time, I swear she looked real. I still have dreams about her. I've never forgotten a single detail. When Pokemon Go first blew up, me, my wife and her brother drove to downtown Huntsville, Alabama. We had been walking around for a while and some guy comes up asking if we can spare a few bucks. He said he had just gotten out of jail, but I told him I didn't carry cash and he went on his way. That had me tense and watching everyone the rest of the night. He wasn't a bad dude, but just realizing that we were in a dangerous area had me triggered. About an hour later I noticed a different, younger, guy walking around with no phone. He seemed like he was out alone, which was weird to me, but I chalked it up to our proximity to several large apartment buildings. Before long we started to feel safe again and decided to venture out from the park, and this younger guy with no phone starts following us. We turn around halfway down a street, he waits and gets back behind us. This goes on for a few minutes, and then out of the corner of my eye I see him reaching into his waistband. I knew what was about to go down, so without turning around towards him I raised the back of my shirt and gave him a good look at my Beretta. That was the last thing I wanted to do, but he had made his intentions clear and he was making his move. I've never seen anyone disappear so quickly. After that we fled from Huntsville and never went out at 1 a.m. to play Pokemon Go again. Before I get hate, I had a permit, I tried my best to avoid the situation, and I had a wife to protect. I don't know if he had a gun or a knife, but I didn't want to find out. I live in a pretty shitty area and unfortunately I have a mother who didn't think it was important to invest in home security devices, and overall take care of my old ass house. This is kinda important for my story. I got home one day and I noticed that my window was open. I did have it locked, but it was such an old window that I think it was just propped open with minimal effort. It was summer, so at first I thought perhaps my mom opened my window. Not the case. I'm looking around my room and thankfully notice that my laptop is safe and sound on my bed. Cool. My PS3 was also still there, my TV. But then I see that my drawers have been rummaged through, and what do you think was missing? All my undergarments. Bras, underwear, lingerie. I freaked out. It was terrifying that they didn't take anything else of actual value, just that. I spent that night at a friend's house because I was really freaked out. Fast forward about a year later. I met this guy on OkCupid and he came to my house to pick me up. My car was parked outside my house. Well, I spent pretty much all day with this guy. When I got home, the same event happened again. I was really devastated and called the cops. I mentioned the fact that my car was outside because I think it's scary and bold for someone to break in, despite my car being outside. I'm guessing they either wanted me to be home, or knew that I wasn't home, aka they were watching me when I left. Cops came in and made a report, but they never caught whoever did it. It's scary as hell knowing that someone is insane and obsessed enough to break in and steal those things. And the fact that they did it twice? I have goosebumps just remembering. When I was 12 or so, my dad owned a lumber business and my neighborhood friend's dad was a contractor. We all liked to skateboard, so one day my dad donated the lumber necessary to build a 6-half pipe in our backyard, and my buddy's dad built it with our help. I left my skateboard back there one day, and when I went to retrieve it, I was met by a homeless man sitting on the other end of the ramp eating a crab apple, which I'm not even sure are edible. He asked why I broke into his house and started accusing me of all kinds of wild shit, and I just kept telling him I just wanted my skateboard. Even at 12 it was clear this guy didn't have all his marbles, so I rushed for my skateboard and he lunged toward me, grabbing the back of my jacket. I worked the jacket off my arms and leapt for my skateboard. When I got to it, I grabbed it and blindly whipped it in his direction, connecting the trucks, the heavy metal bits where the wheels attach, straight into his face. He hit me a few times before falling over, blood everywhere. I just wiped myself off and went home. Never told my parents, my friends, or the police. Not sure why. I was 12, so who knows what my kid logic at the time was. Never saw a body or any sign of the guy after that, so I'm really not sure what happened to him. Hopefully he just limped off and found a new random piece of property to claim. A year and a half or so ago, I was walking home from the library at about 2:30 a.m. after a late night study session. I was exhausted from a study marathon, wanted nothing more than to get home and to go to sleep, and though normally I would be terrified of walking alone that late at night, as a woman, I decided to take a shortcut through a pretty sketchy area. As I was walking through, a homeless guy began to chase me, backed me into a corner of an old building, and pulled a knife on me. He was screaming something along the lines of, "You stupid fucking cunt, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to fucking murder you," and kept getting closer and closer to me. I was completely paralyzed with fear. I can't even fully describe what it felt like. The only thing I remember from that incident is that he had greasy blonde hair, and that I was frantically thinking maybe if I give him my wallet he will go away, but wait, how will I write my exam tomorrow if I don't have an ID? Maybe I can ask him to keep my student card. I was extremely lucky. A group of 3 dudes were walking by and 2 of them threw him to the ground and called the police, and the third one walked me home and made sure I'm safe. My roommate let me sleep in her bed with her that night because I couldn't stop shaking, and to this day I don't walk through that area anymore, at all. Let's set the scene. It's summer early 2000 something. When I was about, 10-12, my friend who lived next door to me almost all my childhood told me she knew of a cool place with lots of cats. Being an animal lover, I was excited to go. It was just a short walk down the main road we both live on. So this house is a pretty normal house, small white with a black shingles, but I didn't know the owners. I was a shy kid and a cautious one at that. My mom always told me that strangers don't have your best interest in mind. So we meet this lady, she's about in her 50s, maybe 60s. She takes us to an old shed behind her house. Keep in mind my house is only maybe 30 yards from the road, hers is maybe 100 yards and the shed another 30 still. Even at that young age I was on edge. Something wasn't kosher here. When she opened the shed, cats of all, he said, "Ooh boy, sure is a scorcher, you girls wanna come down and have a popsicle?" My friend, being the kind of ditch she was, ran up to the house with me close, mostly to stop her. She went in the house, I stopped at the doorway. He was trying to lead us to the basement. Every single fiber of my being screamed this was a bad idea, and my hand locked around her arm to prevent her from going. You know, my mom is probably worried we didn't tell her where we are going. We should go. And I dragged her out of there. She was super mad at me. I gave her a popsicle from our freezer and told my mom what happened. She forbade us from ever going over there again. Fast forward to 6 years later. We hear about that same man who tried to lure us into the basement had taken a little boy and raped him. I don't know if that was his intention for us, but I will never forget the feeling of looking down those stairs and knowing it was a trap. There was this house that was catty-corner to where I lived, and an elderly couple lived there and were generally pretty quiet. Recently their grandson and his girlfriend moved in with them, both of which I went to high school with at the time. I came home late one night after hanging out with my friends and noticed that their lights were on and it looked like someone was leaving in a hurry. I saw the grandson and the girlfriend leaving the home with some bags, and I waved cause I knew them, but they didn't wave back, which I thought was weird. I didn't think much of it until 2 weeks later I got home from work and there were fire trucks and ambulances all around the block. They found the grandfather dead in the home of apparent heart attack, but the grandmother was missing. Turns out the grandson and girlfriend killed the couple, one by smothering grandfather and by stabbing grandmother. Apparently the bags were full of body parts because they had cut up the grandmother to bury her elsewhere. The murders were driven by money for a meth binge apparently. It was a crazy thing to happen in our small town, was on the national news and everything. The year before I went in a group to homecoming and the girl was in our group, before she got involved in meth. Really surreal to think that she was capable of committing that crime. Scary stuff. We lived about 5 minutes away from BTK, found out later when he was caught, and he was all over the news, so everyone was on high alert. He had taken a decade-long hiatus and was suddenly back in the spotlight when he started sending letters to the local news. I was a freshman in high school, one of 5 children, and our parents went out for a date night. My older brother came running up the stairs in a panic an hour or so after our parents left, saying that the house phone had no dial tone. We picked up all the different phones in the house, and sure enough, no dial tone. We remembered the news stations had said BTK would cut the phone line so no one could call for help. So we totally panicked. He had me gather our younger siblings, who were already in bed, fast asleep, while he grabbed the sharpest knives from the kitchen. We gathered together in the living room, in a circle, and my brother gave us each a knife and a short pep talk, basically to stab the crap out of BTK if we saw him. It was a super tense moment. My younger siblings were crying out of fear and I was sure we were all going to die that night. All noises had us shaking with fear. After what seemed like an eternity, probably about 10 minutes, our parents came home. Our dad was super angry initially to see the younger kids awake but quickly calmed down when he realized how terrified we were. He walked around the outside and inside of the house, reassuring us that we were safe. As for the dead phone line, we had gotten new phones recently and when one of the phones was left off the cradle, there would be no dial tone for any of the others. Months later, when BTK was caught, we were all shocked to find out he had lived so close to us all along. I'm from a metropolitan city in Canada. When I was 12, I'm in my mid-20s now, my siblings and I were still going on summer family vacations to the Maritimes with my parents. We had gone to Prince Edward Island 5 summers in a row, so my dad decided to switch things up and search for vacation spots in Nova Scotia, since the timing would align with a conference he had in Halifax. Keep in mind this was before the age of Yelp, TripAdvisor, Airbnb, etc., and he was searching for a cottage or summer home in a province he was not very familiar with. He stumbled upon this website called Heaven's Gate, which advertised a quaint summer home on a small island called Big Tancook, Nova Scotia, which has a population of about 200 people. The owner of the property stated on the website that she had named her home Heaven's Gate because of a tragic accident that had caused the untimely deaths of her husband and 2 children. We figured it might have been a boating accident or a car crash. The way she worded it made it seem like it was a fluke, or a freak accident. The house was idyllic, and right on the ocean, and my dad figured it would be a nice 5-day getaway before we went to Halifax and stayed in a hotel room. So he books it, and we drive to a small town called Chester, where we'll be taking the ferry to Big Tancook. All of these locations are on Wikipedia BTW. The ferry ran twice a day, so if you get on in the morning, you're really committing to spending the whole day there. So we park our car in Chester, hop on the ferry, and by pure coincidence the owner of the property is on the ferry as well and my dad recognizes her from her bio photo on the website. So for about 40 minutes they make awkward small talk about the island and what there is to do while my brother, sister and I search for dolphins in the water. We weren't the brightest kids. When we get off the ferry, the owner says that her niece will be driving us up to the house, since it's located at the top of a pretty steep hill, and we have a bunch of suitcases. So we meet up with her, say goodbye to the property owner, and make our way up to the house. When we get there, my sister and I immediately run in and start exploring every room, including the creepy cellar, while my parents stay on the porch to chat more with the niece. Eventually I find a play structure with a swing set located right behind the house, and I go play there. I notice that the play structure has a plaque that says it's dedicated to 2 red-headed boys who passed away recently, and I make the connection that they are the property owner's sons, but don't think too much of it. A few minutes later my sister finds me, and I notice she is white as a ghost. She sits on the swing beside me and I ask her what's wrong, and getting it out of her is like pulling teeth. Eventually she caves and says that my mother asked, very respectfully, what had happened to the 2 boys and their father. The niece nonchalantly responded that one morning, the husband woke up, snapped, grabbed a rifle and shot and killed his 2 sons and then himself. In the very house that we are about to stay in. For 5 days. So the house that once seemed idyllic and beautiful and relaxing immediately becomes one of the tensest and creepiest environments that I have ever been in. There are pictures of the boys all over the house, their toys are still lying around in 2 of the bedrooms, some of their drawings and poems are framed in the living room. To make matters worse, my brother can see the cemetery they are buried in from the window in his room. None of us slept on that first night, and on the second day my parents started making arrangements to leave early. I was terrified the whole time. I remember not even being able to shower alone. We spent most of our time outside, but the cottage was located right next to the island school, hence the play structure, and everywhere we went there were different commemorative plaques or reminders of what happened. We decide to spend one more sleepless night there. By this time my mom has tried her best to cover up the photos and hide the toys, and we get up at the crack of dawn on the third day and haul ass to get on that first ferry. My parents said that was the fastest they had ever seen us pack, probably because we never unpacked to begin with. A few months later, the property owner sent my dad a survey asking how our trip had gone. He never answered. My house as a kid had a kitchen window that had a clear view of the entire kitchen, with the sink facing away from it. The window was on the side of our house, with about 15 feet between our house and the one next door. My mom always left this window open/unlocked, and the blinds were always open. This bothered me for some reason. I just felt like the neighbors or some rando could easily see or climb in. Our house had been burglarized a year earlier by some neighborhood kids, and we knew they came in through the garage, but this window still felt like an easy access point. So I was always closing and locking the window and shutting the blinds. I would complain to my mom about it, but she would always brush me off like it was no big deal. So one night I'm at a school dance and my friend's mom offers to drop me off at home. As we pull up to my house, we stop on the street in a position where I can see the area outside my kitchen, between homes. Crouched low, in dark clothes, is a person peering through the window. My immediate reaction was to jump out of the car in a full sprint toward the person. He or she/it heard the door open and saw me and immediately took off, running down the dark alley. I was screaming all sorts of things, sprinting up and down the alley looking for them, but they got away. I come back to my house, walk inside, and my mom greets me cheerily as she stands at the kitchen sink, washing dishes, totally oblivious that someone had been a few feet away, staring at her through the open kitchen window. I calmly walk over, close the blinds, lock the window and tell her to never open that window again at night. I was working as a landscaper in Pennsylvania when I was about 16 and we were scheduled to work on a local doctor's yard one Monday, morning. On our way to the job site, we stopped at a fast food and anything there. We were confused, but went back to work for 20 minutes or so, until a UPS driver sped up the driveway and told us to take cover because there was a shooter on the loose and a potential hostage situation at a nearby church. We all hid for a bit until news broke that the shooter had killed himself and the coast was clear, but we were all nervy and on edge for the rest of the day. Later, we found out that the perp was the creepy guy we had seen earlier that morning at the fast food joint, and shortly after we left, he had run out to the adjacent parking lot of the Social Security Administration office, murdered his wife, the shots we heard, who he knew was going there that day, and then holed up in the church before killing himself when the cops showed up. We had literally seen him planning the murder and he was staring at us because of the lady we worked with. After that, I never went back to work there again, as school was going on and my parents didn't want me working in that area of town anymore, but I was pretty freaking shaken up when we found out what happened and how close we were to the crime scene. Side note, the guy's Italian restaurant closed immediately, but stayed vacant for years while they were figuring out what to do with it. I was going for a 5 kilometers run through the conservation area across the street from my parents' house. I was 16 at the time, and the entrance/exit I used was a far less common one than the main one. When I'm walking the last 1.5 kilometers as a cool down, 30 degrees plus and high humidity, it was mid-July, I realized there is a woman with a pit bull on a chain, yes a chain, not a leash, following me. I start jogging again and she speeds up as well to follow me past the turnoff to the main entrance. I don't know what, but something told me in my gut to hide. So I speed up and turn a corner decently ahead of her. I go off the path and hide in the bushes behind a giant tree that's on top of a small hill. Really it was more of a ditch behind the tree than anything. Her and her dog pass looking around like crazy as she can see I'm not on the path ahead of her. Sadly she stopped at the bridge over the river maybe 100 meters ahead, and I did not want to see how long she would wait for. It had been 5 minutes already and my fear instincts were through the roof. So when I see someone coming in the opposite direction and the woman isn't looking, I sneak out and run as fast as I can past this lady and turn down the path to get out. Her and the dog are following me, she is practically running herself. Again I get far enough in front that I can hide in the bushes before the last bridge marking my half km or so. I grew up walking these paths several times a week since I was 5 years old, so I know every little spot, thank FSM. The woman continues over the bridge, where there is a fork in 2 directions, one a fast way out, less than 100 meters, but would spit me out 3 kilometers from home, and one the last half km to my exit. I see her go down the long way where I need to go, probably hoping she can find me on the path. I wait until she must be a decent way along before I venture out of my hiding spot and then I run. I see her up ahead and I have maybe a quarter click left until I'm on the road and can see my parents' house, so I sprint like never before. I do my best to stay on the side of the path so she can't see me at first, then I aim for as far from her as possible. As soon as I can see the road clearly, I risk looking back. She had stopped walking and was just watching me. Then she turned around and walks back the way she came. There was no reason for her and her dog to go down that path then turn around. There are kilometers worth of trails that she could have stayed on. To this day I don't know why she followed me so intently and why she kept waiting for me. I haven't heard of anyone being attacked in the conservation area in the years following, but I live on the other side of the country now. After that I never ran with music or without my cell phone, even though I knew every trail like the back of my hand, even the unmarked ones made by deer.